plan is able to throw these series of farmland access workshops due to funding from Hudson Valley Farmland Network, which is a part of American Farmland Trust, as well as New York State Department of Ag and Markets. And thank you to Nicolina from CCE who coordinated this whole thing, and also Kevin and Sarah for presenting tonight.
And with that, we have Sarah Miller with us, who's an attorney for Hugson and Ross. Did I pronounce that correct?
Hodgson Russ.
Hodgson and Russ. Thank you.
Yeah.
And we have Kevin Bowman from Bowman's Orchard in Rexford. So Kevin is going to speak with us first about his farm and agritourism. You guys have been doing this a long time, and everything that you guys have and things that have worked and not worked and working with the public. And then Sarah will talk about the liabilities with the Agritourism Act and so on and so forth. So Kevin, without further ado, I'll let you take it away.
Okay, we'll see if I can share those pictures again. And if that's showing up there.
It is, we can see it.
Okay, well, good evening. My name is Kevin Bowman, and my wife and I own Bowman Orchards in Rexford, New York, which is the southern part of Clifton Park. Just a few things that we have that some things have worked and some things haven't, and then try to enlighten you or help you in some ways that you can help in the legal process. But the first question that I would ask is, why do you want to invite the public to your farm? And I ask that question not to scare you off, but to make you think a little bit about what you would be partaking in. Inviting the public to your farm is not like inviting your friends over. Although most of them will become your friends, some of them don't have your best interest at heart, to put it briefly. And hopefully, you know, you're going to get them and you're going to draw them, but you need to have a unique product in order to draw those people to your farm or your place of business. And your unique product doesn't have to be, in my case, it would be apples. But what is unique about my apples is that we offer more varieties of apples than anyone near us. So we give the public more of an opportunity to try various varieties. And so that's kind of our specialty. And if it's green beans or if it's whatever, you just need to make sure that you make that product unique. And at one time we were on a NAFMA event, which is an agritainment business national organization. And we were in Texas, and the whole theme of the conference was to make something out of nothing. And if any of you have ever been to the Alamo, when you see the Alamo, I mean, it's cool. There's some history there, but there's really not a lot partaking with the Alamo. And that was part of it, making something out of nothing. Same thing with Lukenbach, Texas. If you've ever been there, it's literally a post office and a building. There's nothing special about it, but it was created, the marketing aspect of it was created to make it special. So just a few things, you know, you can make your product, whatever it is, special, but just think about how you're going to make that special for them. And then the biggest thing that I have to say is that people do not read signs. And we'll talk a little bit later about some of the benefits that we have in New York with the agritourism law. And that's going to require you to do some signage and some posting. But the bottom line is people aren't going to read signs. So if you don't want people to go in a certain area, when you're developing your plan for them to be there, make sure that it's not just a sign that says do not enter, but kind of make it so that they really can't get to that specific area easily. And then you have the signage that will cover you. The second thing that I would just like to add is make sure that you and your insurance agent get along really well and that you're constantly are communicating. We have an incident report that anytime there's an incident with the public, we fill out. And that is just for us. It's not necessarily for anyone else to see. But if you ever do have an incident and you're called to court, you have to realize that that may be 2, 3, 4 years down the road. And so the job of that attorney is to kind of make you, as the landowner, look like a fool and not know what you're talking about. So in that incident report, you'll want very carefully document exactly what happened. And then if you don't fill it out, have a member of your staff fill it out and initial it. And then you need to review it and sign it. And again, this is just so that 3 years from now, you will remember the details of that incident. And that, especially if it goes to a jury, means a whole lot when you're able to answer those questions and not make it up or not constantly say, you know, I don't remember or I don't know. But in regard to that incident report, most likely the person that is suing you is going to ask for a copy of that. And my only advice is that you verify with your insurance company that it is okay to share that. And again, always keep your insurance company in the loop. And what we do here is anytime that there is an incident, we will notify my insurance agent as soon as possible, whether or not we think it's going to become a major incident or not. Just to make sure that the insurance company is aware of the situation. You know, typically in the past, you wanted to, you know, we were always afraid that if you make your insurance company aware of an incident and nothing becomes of it, you know, they're still going to use it against you and your premiums, et cetera. But we've really found that they really do want to know what's going on as soon as possible so that they can work in the situation. The other thing is, don't ever admit that you did something wrong. You know, there's facts and you can present facts, but when you're dealing with the person, let's say that they tripped over a rock or whatever, you know, don't ever say, you know, I'm not sure why we left that rock there or anything like that. Again, be forefront with them, you know, get as much help as needed. It's always best to call an ambulance so that then there's also a paper trail there, and then there's a patient care report. And again, don't go to settle something without your insurance company being aware of that. In other words, if someone comes to you and says, listen, I damaged my vehicle on your farm, I don't want to go through the hassle of an insurance report. Don't ever do that. Make sure your insurance company is aware of that. And we actually had an incident where someone said that we damaged their car. They didn't want to file a report, and we notified our insurance company. And, you know, they found out that this was a history of these people filing reports. In fact, I believe they had filed 35 lawsuits within a period of 1 year over very similar situations. And it was something that, you know, very easily we could have said, oh yeah, I can see how you did that. And we offered just to fix their vehicle. But, you know, there's a lot of scam artists out there. So have a good relationship with your insurance company, and as frequently as an incident, regardless of how small it may seem, make sure that you make them aware of that and bring them up to speed. And then in New York State, we have the Safety and Agricultural Tourism Act. And I think Sarah will probably go into this in more depth, but it's something that we have lobbied for many years. And finally, it actually came. I have had several lawsuits, but unfortunately they were before this law was enacted. But I also have to tell you that we've never had anyone successfully collect anything from us other than, medical injuries or medical damages. And then the only other thing that I would add is you have to remember in today's society that everybody has a cell phone. Everybody is taking pictures, taking movies, sharing things with your friends, with their friends. And so just be aware of your actions, and just remember in the back of your mind that there's probably a camera rolling somewhere, and you do want to treat people the best that you can, obviously, but you also have to protect yourself and all of that. And people are going to love any agricultural related activities, and be willing to share your story with them. That's kind of why they come to you. Don't be afraid of inviting people onto your farm, but do make sure that you have had discussions with your insurance company, and if you're adding new attractions or new things for them to do, make sure that they're aware of it, and just get their blessings when you do that. And in cases like this, the insurance company is actually going to be your friend. They are going to be the ones who pay for your representation. So just make sure that you're good friends with them and with your agent, and that there's really good lines of communication back and forth in that. And I say none of that to scare anyone from doing these things, but just so that you are covered, and you're made aware that not everybody out there is coming to your farm because they're your friend. And if anyone has any questions, I'd be more than happy to answer those.
I do not have any questions in the chat right now, Kevin. Not sure if you want to show us those pictures, the more of the pictures that you had on there.
Yeah, I can do that. I think I can do that.
Also, just a reminder, if anyone does have questions, feel free to put them in the chat, and Nicolina and I will be monitoring that so we can ask them for you.
Just some of our activities. That's our apple cannon. Then that's just the candy corner in our store. Just an overview, and you'll see the trailer park there. We're part of a organization known as Harvest Hosts, where you allow them to come park in your facility overnight, or sometimes it could be for longer periods of time, and you don't charge them to do that, but then they are able to come visit your farm or whatnot. We've had some really, really good people and made some really good relationships through that. Obviously, our bloom time is one of our favorite times. This is a picture of where we had swarms of bees, and the bees actually, it's such a productive year and so quickly that they outgrew their hive. And so this is probably one of those things that could happen on your farm that you're going to have to look out for. And if you're open during this time of year, it may be something that you would want to make sure that people are kept away from. So there are things that will come up from time to time that you don't really plan on. And so that's another good reason why you and your staff have to really, before you open, make sure that you're scouting for incidents that, or things that could create issues. Again, just the gem mining, just some different activities. And this is probably why people are going to want to come to your farm. And this is your unique story.
So we do have a question, and it says, which Sarah may get into, but if not, Kevin, you might be able to answer, is how much liability insurance should you carry?
That's a really good question. And we wrestle with that every year. We currently have a $2 million liability, and then we have a $5 million umbrella on top of that. And again, we've never really had lawsuits up in those ranges, but you know, your liability insurance is not a huge cost when you factor it all in. So, you know, it kind of depends on how you feel that you're open to the public, and what your sales volume is. And if there's a magical formula, hopefully Sarah can share that with us.
Sorry, Kevin, I couldn't unmute myself. I don't think there is a magical formula. I think it's important to talk with your insurance carrier, like you said, and identify the activities that you offer and assess how risky they are and the likelihood of injury, and go from there. And it is just it's a risk assessment that you have to make in conjunction with your insurance professional.
And a lot of insurance companies, if you do have livestock, for example, horse rides, pony rides, make sure they're aware of that. And that is in the insurance world, that is a huge liability. However, I must also tell you that in the past 20 years, we've never had a lawsuit involving any of the animals or livestock. So insurance companies all look at it as a big deal, but with us, it's been more things that tripping in a row. I don't even think we've had any incidents involving ladders, you know, in the past 20 years. So it's more related to common sense injuries, but I suppose if you did have livestock that did damage, it could be a much bigger issue.
So Kevin, we have a question. It says, since opening, what has been the most valuable lesson learned from having public on the farm?
The most valuable lesson, I think, would probably be to just make sure you have open communication with your insurance agent. And even on the small stuff, you know, I wouldn't worry about being afraid to let the insurance company for fear of raising premiums, but definitely for not reporting incidents to them or potential incidents, because certainly not everything becomes a potential incident. This is actually our family, which also work here all fall, and most of them all year. And altogether, we have about 85 employees. And probably 20 of them are what we would consider, you know, full-time employees, and then the rest would be seasonal. Of course, this year with COVID, you know, we had to change things up quite a bit with our masks and with some of the way that we did things.
So I have a couple questions that have come in, and it says, how do you communicate and receive feedback from the public to improve and expand your business?
The way that we do that is through Facebook. We'll get some. And again, you have to look at, if you look at things like Yelp, just take it with caution. We have found that most of the issues that we find on Yelp are put there by people that we have caught stealing, or we have made asked leave the property because they were being disruptive, or things such as that. But when we get feedback via email or via Facebook, we actually will look at that. We don't even look at Yelp because, you know, for example, we may have 10,000 people that come through here on a Saturday or Sunday, and we may have 2 bad Yelp reviews. But we can usually tell you the car that they were driving and what the issue was. So, you know, it's really hard for us, and especially for family members, to look at those Yelp reviews and just kind of ignore them because, you know, this is your life. It kind of tears apart your heart sometimes. But you have to look at those and figure out and actually look at what that incident behind that was. And 9 times out of 10, those reviews are not really have anything to do with what they were saying. So look at Facebook, look at, you know, when people actually take the time to write you a letter or write you an email, or, you know, look for you to talk to you, those are the ones that you really want to pay attention to. Because sometimes there's people, you know, for example, if we catch someone stealing, 9 times out of 10, they'll put up a bad review because they're somehow trying to get even with you because you caught them stealing. And that's one thing that we do not tolerate, is stealing at any level. You know, the governor's trying to make less of that a crime. But to me, that's taking money right out of my grandkids and my children's mouths. And so we do not tolerate stealing, and our customers knows that, and they actually will support us because of that.
So we have a few more questions that have come in. One is, are you organic?
We are not organic.
The other questions, another question is, at what threshold do you decide what is an incident, what an incident is, and when to report it to an insurance agent?
Okay. We will do things like if, for example, with the apples, with the open farm, bee stings occur quite frequently. We'll normally take care of that. We don't usually report that to the insurance company. However, if we do call an ambulance because there was anaphylactic shock or something like that in regard to a bee sting, then we would report that. If somebody trips, we would report that. If there was a car accident in the parking lot, we don't normally report those, but we would fill out the form so that we could reference that if needed. But if it was a car that claimed our property damaged them, then we would definitely report that. We don't really do a, you know, obviously we couldn't do a monetary threshold, but if it's a, anytime an ambulance is called, we certainly fill out an incident report. And, you know, we may fill out 100 incident reports a year, and then maybe 5 of those we report to the insurance company, because some of them are, you know, very, very small and minor.
Okay, and the next question we have here is a 2-parter. Where do you promote events most regularly? Instagram, Facebook, newspapers, etc. And have you set measurable goals throughout the years to expand from apple picking to a full service experience store and activities?
First part of the question is, last year was the first year that we did this, and we dropped all television, radio, newspaper ads, and we went to 100% digital. And we actually hired a marketing firm to do that work for us. And we were extremely well pleased with those results. We still do a lot of, you know, the news reporters will call us up when we have a freeze warning or something like that. And so we try to get them on the farm, but we have not done local advertising of that nature this last year. Second part of the question is, I think with our marketing firm, they actually have divided us up into various time frames. And we actually use their expertise a lot for determining some of that. And we're actually still wrestling. Advertising is one of those things that you're spending a lot of money and you really don't know how much you're getting back. And that's the nice part about digital, is that you can actually track all that, as opposed to local TV and radio. You really don't know. And we've tried coupons, we tried various things, and the redemption rate is so low that it doesn't really give you a good idea of how that money's going. And I'm not sure if I answered all of that second part of that question or not.
I believe you have, unless someone will state otherwise. Well, I'm not seeing any more questions coming in. Okay, oh, I'm sorry. Yes, we do have another one. What small steps in the beginning when starting out did you take to expand the business?
Well, and it is it's a long-term commitment. I think word of mouth is probably your best way of growing your business. And that's why, you need to have something unique, other than, it's just not selling veggies or selling apples. When we first started back in the 70s, our first day was like $2.50. And we've grown a little bit since that time. But it does take time, and it's a huge commitment. And but in the end, it's worth it. And the other thing is, make sure that that all of your help is on the same page as you are, as far as your customer service and the way that you want to treat customers, etc. And you need to train your employees, and you have to be able to, not every employee is meant for every position. And so, if an employee doesn't work out in one area, don't be afraid to maybe move them to another area with input from them. It's never my goal to terminate an employee. But we try to work with them and move them around. And I think in probably 20 years, we've actually only terminated about 3 employees. So we've been able to work through it and find what gifts they have.
So we have 2 more questions that have come in, and it said, what was the ag entertainment organization you had mentioned earlier?
That is called NAFTMA. North American Farmers Direct Marketing Association. And that is probably one of the best ways to see what agritainment is happening in, the entire country. And we probably have more contacts made by that organization than anywhere else. And it's good because most of those members have done things, and they're more than willing to share. And everything doesn't work. Some things work, some things don't. And the only caveat to that is you really have to know your customer base and to know what will work there. And at Bowman Orchards, our main thing is apples, small fruits, etc. The agritainment is secondary, and a lot of the NAFMA members, agritainment is their business, and their produce is secondary to that. But once you work through those details, it's a really good organization. And although some of the outings, et cetera, are a little on the pricey side, it just takes one idea that you gain from that seminar or that tour to more than pay for your attendance. And so well worth the money in the long run.
And then we have one last question here, and it is there a company you use to make your signs for the farm?
We basically do most all that we have in-house. If we have to get something painted, then we will find a company to do that. We used to have a local woman that did that, and she's since gone out of the business. But something important is try to make sure that your signage is reflects what you want your customers to feel like. You know, in other words, a magic marker on a piece of poster board doesn't really cut it for us. When you're first starting, it might be okay, but you know, make your signage really good, because that's what people are going to see. And just try not to have too many words on your sign, because people aren't going to read it.
Well, if we don't have any more questions coming in for Kevin, Kevin, thank you for joining us. My first job was actually working at Bowman Orchards doing the pony rides. And it amazes me the people that came back year after year after year after year because their kid fell in love with one of the horses, you know, and they came to do their pony ride every year. And I think it's beautiful to have that customer base that is that loyal. So it is a wonderful thing, and we're very fortunate to have you in our backyard. So thank you for joining us.
All right, I appreciate that. And you brought up a good point. Name your farm animals, and when something happens with your farm animals, make sure that it gets on Facebook. You know, we had one of those ponies that passed away, and it was unbelievable how many people replied to that announcement. So, and you know, your family is they're going to kind of adopt you as their family. And that's really the joy of inviting people to your farm.
Well, thank you. I know you got to jump off, but it was great to have you here. And I just want to say thank you again.
Okay, no problem. And if you have any other questions, you can get them to me, and we'll try to answer them.
Thanks, Kevin.
Thank you so much.
All right, you guys have a great evening.
Bye. And without any further ado, Sarah, that is going to leave us to you.
Sure.
And I believe I made it so you can share your screen. Let me know if you have any problems with that. All right.
Can you see it?
I can.
Excellent. Okay. Well, thanks, Nicolina, for turning it over, and thanks to Kevin for giving all of that practical advice. I think that's the best way to kind of learn these concepts, is to see them in practice. So thanks to him. Tonight, I'm here to speak with you all about how to enhance your farm's protections from liability under New York's Safety and Agricultural Tourism Act. And Kevin briefly touched on the existence of this law here in New York. But we're going to get into the requirements of the law and what you can do to enhance your protection against liability. So I was putting together this presentation, and I thought it would be fun to include a quote. And I found a quote that I thought was really applicable to our conversation this evening from Thomas Jefferson. And he was quoted as saying that agriculture is our wisest pursuit because it will in the end contribute most to real wealth, good morals, and happiness. And I think that the same applies to agritourism, because here in New York and all over the country, and especially I think this past summer, agritourism has served a very important purpose to our communities. It's provided extra income to farms and an opportunity for them to educate the public. And it's also provided the public with a great chance to get outside, spend time with family and friends, while social distancing, of course, and and provides an opportunity to learn about a working farm and farm life and the products that a farm puts out. So I just thought if it's not too much trouble, and if it's too much trouble, we can skip this. But I was just thinking we could do a quick polling question. And the question is, how long have you offered agritourism activities at your farm?
So I've just launched the poll.
Thank you.
So you guys can click on it.
Yep, 0 to 1 years, 1 to 3 years, 5 to 10 years, and 10 or more years.
Now, can you see this on your screen, Sarah?
I can, yes, thank you.
Okay, cool.
All right, we'll just give it another second here. Well, it looks like most of our participants are in the 0 to 1 year range, so congratulations. And we have a few who are in the 5 to 10 plus range too, which is awesome. Congratulations and thank you for joining us this evening. Okay, so let's move on. Can I get rid of this, Nicolina? Okay, there we go.
Oh, okay, got it. Good.
There we go. So, there we go. So anyone welcoming the public onto a working farm knows that doing so involves risks, and Kevin mentioned a few of them during his talk. And inevitably, you may be faced with situations like these, and you may have to ask yourself questions like the ones on this slide. Am I responsible if a visitor falls off a ladder and hurts their back while picking apples in my orchard? Or if a visitor falls on uneven land and breaks her ankle while touring my dairy farm, do I have to pay her medical bills? Or if an animal kicks or bites a child at my petting farm, will I be sued? And what if a visitor enters a restricted off-limits area and is injured? Tonight, I'm going to talk with you a little bit about the steps you can take to enhance your protections against being liable for injuries and, goodness forbid, death resulting from scenarios like these. So there is some good news, and that is that in 2018, New York passed its Safety and Agricultural Tourism Act, and it is now among many states in the country that have a law like this that provides enhanced protections to farmers when they invite the public onto their land. And the law basically provides that absent exceptional circumstances, farms that follow the law's specific requirements won't be held liable for injury or death to an agritourist visitor. Now, the exceptional circumstances that are excluded here are incidents that would result from gross negligence or recklessness or intentional conduct. So we're basically talking about incidents that result from negligence here. There are 5 key requirements under the law that we'll walk through here in a moment, but here's a quick overview of what those are. The first is that you operate an agricultural tourism area. The second is that you post certain signage, which Kevin briefly touched on during his talk. The third is that you provide written information to visitors. The fourth is that you provide adequate employee training. And the fifth is that you take reasonable care to prevent foreseeable risks. So let's jump right on in here to requirement number 1, which is that you operate an agricultural tourism area. The law provides the first 5 bullets here as specific examples of what is an agricultural tourism activity. And that includes the production of maple sap and maple products, tours on a farm or tours on a winery, indoor and outdoor equine activities. But note that this law excludes equine therapy. So a pony ride would be considered an equine activity under this law. Any U-pick activities, which range from apples to cherries to Christmas trees to pumpkins, any sort of U-pick activity, as well as hiking and hunting on the farm property. The law also provides this catch-all of anything else that might be considered an agricultural tourism activity. And those catch-all activities are other recreation for the enjoyment or education of the public that promotes the farm's products and enhances the public's understanding and awareness of farming and farm life. So if you offer an activity that's not in one of these 5 enumerated activities above, you should determine whether your activity or your farm offers something that's recreational for the enjoyment or education of the public, that promotes the farm's products and enhances the public's understanding and awareness of farming and farm life. The second requirement is that a farm post various signage throughout the premises. The first type of posted signage are warning signs. These signs need to identify and warn of all of the inherent risks at the farm. A one-size-all-fit sign is not going to cut it under this law. And that's why I have here on the statute, or on the slide, this red warning: farming is dangerous and involves risk, with a big X through it, because that's a generic sign that's not sufficient to warn people of the risks. Instead, your sign needs to list the risks that are specific to your farm, in particular, that are specific to the activities that you offer on your farm, that are specific to the farm's operations, and to the site conditions on the farm. And I think, practically speaking, a good way to go about in identifying these risks is to put yourself in the shoes of a visitor, whether that be a little boy, like this little guy on the slide, or your typical visitor, anyone who could visit, and look at the risks and walk your farm and identify the risks through the eyes of a visitor, because risks that are apparent to risks that exist for a visitor might not be apparent to you because you're at the premises every day and you're not necessarily thinking about these things. And it's also a good idea, Kevin mentioned, become best friends with your insurance carrier. You may want to call them up and have them help you identify the risks. Or another idea is to contact your lawyer and have them help you do that as well. These signs need to be posted at every point of sale location and every ticket sale location, whether on-site or off-site. So if you sell produce at a farmer's market and you also sell tickets to your agritourism activities at the farmer's market, you need to have this warning sign somewhere at your farmer's market where you're selling those tickets. It's important, like Kevin said, that you periodically reassess the risks that are at your farm, which may change based on the activities that you offer, or if you open a new building, or if your operations change on the farm. It's important to go back and reassess risks due to changing circumstances. And finally, always remember to replace, repair, and update your signs. If there's a sign that's been weathered from a storm, if it was knocked down, if it needs to be moved, make sure that you're walking your property and making sure that you have got signs that are clear and they're posted in the correct areas.
So Sarah, we do have a question in the chat that's related to this.
Mm-hmm.
If the farmer does a chemical spraying and then the public is invited onto the land, would this be considered an issue, and would this issue be fixed with proper signage, or would further steps need to be taken?
So I think there are a couple things. One thing comes into play when we talk about requirement number 5, which is always to put safety first and to take reasonable steps to prevent an injury. So, if to the extent you can avoid a spraying in areas where the public is coming within the time period where the chemical is still present or can expose someone, you might want to consider avoiding that type of a scenario. And I do think that definitely worth putting out that as a risk on your signs, that you know, you use products to maintain your crops. You can also rope off an area if there's a certain area that's been sprayed recently, you know, rope off that area and put signs up that say off limits, do not pass here, employees only. So I think those are some steps you can take, but I think the big picture is to act reasonably and prevent any risks that you can prevent.
We have another question too,
Mhm.
and I don't know if this is something that may come into play later on.
Mhm.
Is there any legal advice on farm dogs? Meaning if our dogs are out, we cover ourselves, our animals, and our customers.
Mhm. Yeah, so I think if your pets are friendly and they're they live on your farm and it's a working farm, you know, I think if your dog's friendly and he doesn't have any vicious propensities or a history of nipping people or attacking people or growling, I think that, you know, I've certainly been on farms as an agritourist and there are dogs around. So, you know, I think it's not prohibited, but again, you have to assess the dog and the circumstances and make a call on that. Also something to ask your insurance carrier about. So
Another follow-up to that question is, how do we prevent others bringing their animals through signage?
So you can have a rule that says no pets allowed. The one exception is service animals under the Americans with Disabilities Act. I believe that service animals, that you need to allow service animals onto your property, but you can certainly have a rule that says no pets allowed other than service animals. Should I continue?
Yes, I think that's all we got for right now. Thank
Okay, sure. Okay, I think I covered everything on this slide. Another type of directional signage that's required to receive protections under this law is directional signage. And the directional signage requires that you clearly identify designated paths, areas open to the public, and any off-limits areas. So for example, you can designate areas that are open for picking and that are closed for picking. So I've been at apple orchards, and Kevin could probably give this example better than me, but if you have 5 varieties of apples and only 2 are ready for picking, you should post signage that directs the public to the areas that are open for picking and ropes off or clearly states that certain areas are off limits for picking. Here's some examples of signs, you know, you pick cherries with an arrow this way, you know, restroom, parking, things like that. Those are examples of designated pathway areas, signs. Areas open to the public versus off limits areas. Here, Kevin was giving the example of putting up a sign. If you have a shed that has machinery, equipment, chemicals, put up a sign that clearly states that staff only is allowed beyond this point, no visitors. And I really liked Kevin's tip, which is don't rely on your sign. Also lock the door and make sure that no one can go in because people don't read signs. I thought that was a really good tip as well. And again, you know, make sure that you're repairing, replacing, and moving these signs as necessary throughout the season or when circumstances change. Also make sure the signs are easy to read, you know, that they're big enough, that they're not blocked by something. Things like that are important too. Another type of posted signage requirement is that the sign, another sign or the same sign can list visitor responsibilities. So under this law, a visitor does have specific responsibilities. And those include that the visitor exercise reasonable care regarding the risks. They comply with posted signs. They have to stay in the designated areas and follow posted rules and not remove, deface, or alter signage. In addition to these, you might want to consider implementing some additional rules that are specific to your operation and farm and posting those on the premises. For example, no pets allowed, or other safety rules that you have and you'd like the public to follow. Because I believe that if these rules are properly displayed and they're prominent and they're communicated by your employees and enforced, I think additional rules can help provide more protection potentially in the event that someone is injured as a result of not following one of the farm specific rules. So that's something to consider as well when you're putting together your risk assessment and rules.
So we have a question, and it's,
Sure.
What are the New York State rules for signage for the visually impaired?
That's a good question. I don't know offhand. I can tell you that what I would recommend, and I don't have the answer to that, and I can certainly, if you'd like to send me an email after, I can certainly follow up with you. But what I would recommend is that if someone comes onto the property that's visually impaired, they are directed to an employee who can verbally communicate the contents of all the signage to that person, or if that person's accompanied by someone who can read the sign to them. But I think it's important for your employees to be on the lookout for people who may be visually impaired and assisting them in learning the responsibilities and learning about the risks. But happy again to get a more specific answer on that. It's a good question.
I don't see any more questions.
Okay.
No. Thank you.
Sure. And the final type of posted signage that you need to put up is that visitors have a right to a refund if they're not willing to accept the risks of the activities, or they're unwilling to exercise reasonable care while they're on your farm. So to receive a refund, a person must seek out a farm employee or be directed to the appropriate farm employee, declare that they're unwilling to accept the risks of picking apples, or they're not willing to be careful while they're on your property, and they need to present you with an unused ticket. And at that point, you have to give them their money back, and they need to not participate in any of the activities. Okay, requirement 3 is that agricultural tourism activities provide written information to visitors. These flyers, written information, is to direct visitors to the posted warning signs. The good news is that you can meet this requirement if your flyers include the language that's published by the New York Department of Agriculture. And in the materials that Nicolina distributed earlier today, there's this nice handout from the New York State Department of Agriculture and Markets called the Overview of the Safety and Agricultural Tourism Act. On the last page is Appendix A, and it sets forth the language that you need to have on your written flyers. And if you have that language on there, you should be found to have complied with this requirement.
We have 2 questions that have come in.
Mhm.
And one is, how do you meet the refund ticket requirement if you run a boarding or lesson stable?
Well, would it be I guess you'd need to determine if it's if someone's coming in just for a one-time lesson, or if it's more of if they've purchased a package or something. I think under those circumstances, you might want to consider having more of a, maybe some more information provided to that type of a customer. So it's different than someone who's just coming on and they don't want to, you know, they bought a pony ticket ride, but now they're afraid to go on the pony. It's more of someone who's coming in and seeking out more long-term consistent services. So I think that if they start their lesson and they decide they don't want to do it anymore, then I think, you know, you'd have to give them the money back for the remaining lessons that they purchased, or maybe you give them their money back for part of the lesson. I don't have the specific answer to that, but my colleague, Melissa Subject, is our equine law expert, and I can certainly see if she has any insight on that, because it is a good question. But I think you'd probably, depending on the circumstances, you'd probably have to give some sort of a partial refund at least. But again, happy to pass that question along if you want to follow up with me afterwards.
And then the second question we had is, what about farm stand signage? People are still coming onto the property, but we haven't started U-Pick yet or other farm activities. Does all the signage still apply?
So would the question be that, do the signage requirements apply when our agricultural tourism activities are not open yet?
Elizabeth, if you want, you can unmute yourself and
Oh,
ask.
sure, yeah.
That's okay. Farm stand only.
So if you're selling tickets for your agritourism activities at your farm stand, I think you would need to have the warning to visitors signage. But to the extent people are coming up to your property to see if you're open for U-Pick yet, and you're selling at the farm stand, if you're just selling vegetables at the farm stand, you don't need to have the signs. But if you're selling tickets for your U-Pick or your pony rides for the next month, then you do need to have that signage. Does that?
Like I said, at this point, it's just the farm stand only. There's no other activities offered yet, still expanding.
Yes. So this would not apply to a farm stand that's simply selling the products of the farm. But again, if you're selling tickets to a pony ride that you're going to open in a month, then you would need to have that signage.
She said, okay, she understands now. She's, thank you.
Oh, sure, of course.
And do you have to provide restrooms or porta potties?
I don't believe you do. I think that if you do, it needs to be accessible for everyone. There is no specific requirement that you have to provide a restroom, I don't believe, at least not under this law.
I'm not seeing any other questions quite yet.
Okay. All right, 2 more requirements here. Requirement number 4 is that you provide adequate training to your employees. So you're probably asking yourself, well, what is adequate training? And the answer is that it's not a one-size-all thing, but it depends on your farm and the activities that you offer and what the conditions are on your farm. So you should always provide your employees with information on the farm risks and the farm operation. In other words, educate them on what those are. You should also educate your employees on what a visitor's responsibilities are. For example, like the ones that we spoke about a few minutes ago. In addition to educating them on any other additional rules that the farm has implemented. You'll also want to provide employees with the information and skills they need to help visitors prevent injuring themselves and to prevent risks to visitors. So for example, Nicolina, you said you worked on the pony ride at Kevin's Orchard. Any employee who's helping a child onto a pony should be trained in how to properly mount the child onto the pony, how to walk the pony around the circle and make sure that the child remains on top of the pony and does not fall off. And they should also be educated on the risks, and how to prevent them. So if a pony, ponies can kick or swat their tails or things like that. So an employee who's in charge of that part of the operation needs to be educated on how to properly operate that aspect. In addition, say you've got an employee who's driving a tractor around that's pulling people in a wagon and taking them out to the pumpkin patch. Well, the employee who's driving that tractor needs to be competent and perhaps have a certain, I don't know if we need a certain license to drive it, but needs to be well aware of all the risks that come with that. Those are just a couple of quick examples. And finally, you should provide your employees with training so that they can effectively communicate all of these rules and instructions to the visitors. Basically, look at your employees as farm ambassadors. They're the people who are helping you run the operation smoothly, and they need to be equipped with the information so that they can be a farm advocate and that they can help prevent all of these risks to the extent they exist on your farm. So you can implement a training program, and you may want to consider doing that at the beginning of the season and periodically as you onboard employees. If you onboard a couple employees in July, you'll want to provide them training when they begin employment. A few ways to think about doing a training program. You can certainly have an in-person meeting and give a tour of the farm and walk through everything that way. You can provide written information, or if you have a bigger operation, you could consider doing a training video one year and playing that for employees, and then sitting and talking them through and talking everything through with them. To the extent it needs to be updated, be sure you do that too. Another important thing to consider is documenting that you've trained your staff. So keeping a record of when the training occurred, the employees that attended, and what information was provided and reviewed with your employees. Requirement 5, which we touched on briefly a few moments ago, is that you need to take reasonable care to prevent foreseeable risks. And this is basically the same thing as a landowner's duty to keep his or her premises in a reasonably safe condition for intended uses and users. The most practical way to think about this requirement is to take steps to prevent preventable injuries. Be proactive to prevent accidents, and always remember that safety comes first. Again, a one-size-all approach is not adequate to meet this requirement. So how do you meet this requirement? Well, one way would be to walk the property and perform a site inspection to identify any defects and risks that you see or that you're aware of, and to fix them, remove them, or prevent the public from accessing them. So for example, if you have a broken saddle or a broken gate, fix it or take it out of rotation. If there are barbed wire fencing in an area accessible to the public, or wires, either block that area off or fix it. If you know of an area that becomes slippery when it's wet, put a mat down or put mulch down or something to decrease the risk or prevent the risk of someone slipping there. If you have aggressive animals or animals that you're not quite sure how they'll react to the public, or if they've had a couple incidents in the past, even one incident in the past, keep them out of public reach. Keep them away from the public. Again, some of these are obvious. If you've got heavy machinery or chemicals, store them away in an area that's off limits to the public, lock it up, put signs that says staff only, no visitors past this point. And if you know of any other dangers that may not be open and obvious to someone, but that they exist, make sure that you post signs that make them aware of where that is, what it is, and rope it off or prevent them from going near it altogether. And you might want to consider making your working areas off limits too. So to the extent you have, and this is an example, I don't know if it applies to anyone, but if you have a dairy farm and you give tours of your dairy farm, make sure that everyone is viewing the operation at a distance behind ropes or gates, and that you have employees monitoring people so that they don't go past that point. And, I think it's, if you have a relationship with your insurance carrier, you have a lawyer, this is something that you can work with them on. They'll help you. They can do a walkthrough with you. They can just walk through these things and discuss things that you can do to help put safety first and prevent accidents. So this is just the key takeaway. I feel like I've droned on here for a while, but if you follow these requirements and someone's injured while they're participating in one of the activities on your farm, you won't be held liable for injury or death unless there's an exceptional circumstance like willful conduct or recklessness. But remember that failure to implement any one of these obligations could destroy the protections for you under the law. I just wanted to briefly touch on insurance and waivers here. Kevin talked a lot about having insurance, and it's important to remember that liability and a lawsuit are two different things. Liability is a determination of whether you are responsible for someone's injury. A lawsuit is a proceeding that's commenced by someone who claims they're injured, and the lawsuit is the process that determines the liability. So, putting your insurance carrier on notice and contacting them and telling them what activities you're offering is a good way to determine if you have, proper coverage for what's happening on your farm. Because in the event that you are sued for something, this act won't cover your defense costs for the lawsuit, but the act could come into play later if you're able to demonstrate that you've met all the requirements. Another thing is that you shouldn't assume that your current policies cover all of the activities that you're offering on the farm. Reach out to your carrier and have a discussion with them, and they may even have a checklist to see if you're following these 5 requirements. That could definitely be the case. In terms of waivers, I think, if you're offering an activity on your farm that doesn't necessarily fall under an agricultural tourism activity, you may want to contact your attorney to determine if a waiver would be helpful. I will say a couple things about waivers. Waivers generally don't protect against conduct that's caused by gross negligence, recklessness, or willful conduct. And waivers are not always enforceable. It depends on who's signing them and what the waiver says. There are specific requirements that someone must follow in order for a waiver to be enforceable. So with that, I just happy to take more questions. I just like to thank all of you for listening in tonight, and I hope we provided some information that you can take and go back and hopefully work to enhance the protections for your farm for the summer and fall. So thanks.
Thank you, Sarah, so much. And yes, if anyone has questions, feel free to put it in the chat, or you feel free to unmute yourself and ask Sarah yourself anything that you may have questions about. But yes, thank you, Sarah, so much. This is a very popular topic, and I think it's something we all it's always a worry in the back of our minds, whether it's something we have. I have horses on my own farm, and people come, and we're not an agritourism place, but it's still something I always think about in the back of my mind. It's good to be able to have people like you to give us this information. So thank you.